Once upon a time, there was a powerless nobody named Jesus who lived in a troubled backwater of the Roman Empire, who marched straight into the jaws of death and challenged the systems of empire and oppression that ruled his people's lives. Over the course of 3 years, this man had made a name for himself in the countryside as a teacher, as a healer of the poor. Now he brought his message to the centers of power in Jerusalem. His disciples believed he was a man of divine destiny. They believed when he entered Jerusalem, the Roman Empire would topple, and the power of God would install their teacher Jesus as the new king. Jesus told them the power of God is not that kind of power. He said, the kingdom of love I have been telling you about is not that kind of kingdom. They either didn't understand or didn't believe him. In Jerusalem, Jesus was straightaway put to death by the Roman Empire for the crime of sedition, the obvious, perhaps inevitable outcome of his mission. And his disciples fled in panic and confusion. Now, the Gospel of Mark, the earliest written version of the story we have, and the briefest and least embellished, tells us that after Jesus was killed and the disciples had all fled, his body was sealed in a tomb. On Sunday morning, the grieving women in Jesus' life, his mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and a woman named Salome, went to the tomb to see the body. When they got there, the tomb had been unsealed and the body of Jesus was gone. A stranger told them that Jesus had risen from the dead and urged them to go tell the disciples what had happened. The women leave, wondering and afraid, and say nothing. And that is the end of the story for Mark. But it's not the end of the story. The disciples came back to one another. Perhaps it was the women who had carried the flame for them in those dark early days. People began to gather again under constant threat of punishment to keep alive the stories of what Jesus had told them about a realm of love on earth. They cared for one another in new ways. They shared their possessions. They fed each other. They gave to the poor. They freed their enslaved servants. They met secretly in each other's homes, rich and poor together. They welcomed all to their table, regardless of rank, regardless of social status. And in this way, they began to build an underground network of people committed to this new way of being, a way defined by a love ethic that was utterly at odds with the values of empire. And they came to understand these unlikely events with a new story, that the man the Roman Empire tried to put to death, their beloved teacher, was very much alive. Jesus in the gospel story tells his followers that death does not get the last word. He tells them that hate and violence and empire do not get the last word. Love gets the last word. Life gets the last word. Hope gets the last word. And he tells them to be the hands and heart of love in the world. He tells them to be the hope of the world, and he tells them that love has already won. While they were grieving, love has already won. So back at the start of the church here in September, you may remember I said that we were going to look at some audacious ideas this year. Ideas that, whether you agree with them or not, in whole or in part, are capable of opening up fresh perspectives or getting us thinking in new ways. In this month of April, I've invited you to step inside some different spiritual perspectives with this in mind, to sort of try them on for size, as it were. Again, not to agree or disagree necessarily, but just to imagine the possibilities of a different perspective. And so at the beginning of April, we tried on the idea of reincarnation. And last week, we spent time with a Buddhist tale about enlightenment. Today, on Easter Sunday, I'm going to ask us to step inside what is, for our tradition, a very old idea, but one that may now be a little unfamiliar to us. I want us to try on our universalist theology as our Universalist Christian ancestors may have experienced it. I want us to try on our universalism as an Easter religion, as the joyous conviction that love is stronger than hate, that love is stronger even than death, that love has already won. Now, it's an interesting fact of our Unitarian Universalist history that the founder of Unitarianism, William Ellery Channing, and the founder of Universalism, Hosea Ballou, both lived in Boston at the same time, this being the early 1800s. They both did their most active writing and preaching and pastoring, founding these two young religious movements at about the same time. In fact, they lived just a few blocks away from each other, albeit in different neighborhoods. But as far as we know, they never met, they never had a conversation, they never argued theology over a cup of tea. Sometimes they argued theology in print. Hosea Ballou, for his part, admired Channing's Unitarian theology, but he disputed certain Unitarian ideas about the afterlife. Channing, for his part, mostly ignored Hosea Ballou, but considered Universalism a disaster, calling it one of the most irrational ideas he had ever encountered, and not just irrational, but dangerous to society. And in this, Channing was not alone, because Universalism, which once upon a time spread like wildfire across the American rural landscape, was greeted with hostility and dismay wherever it went. Because the Universalists like Hosea Ballou had a very radical idea. They believed that the fundamental attribute of God was love. And if God was a God of love, and if God was all-powerful, and if God desired God's children to be saved by love, then all of God's children would, in fact, in the end, be saved by love. Because what God wants, God gets, being God and all. And if God wanted to spend eternity surrounded by God's children, every single one of them, each of whom's name was beloved, then God gets that. That is what would happen. So in this view, in the view of our Christian Universalist ancestors, all people go to heaven eventually. In some versions of this theology, you go through like a period of reform after death. In others, you go straight away to heaven. Either way, ultimately, all people are redeemed by love. And the idea that everyone goes to heaven, the idea that we are all ultimately bound for goodness and a resting place in God's love, all of us, no exceptions, not one, this idea was held by the authorities, including authorities like Channing, to be absurdly subversive and dangerous. Because if everyone goes to heaven, what is to motivate our good behavior? Why would we not do evil if in the end we all get the same reward? And so universalism was held to be the destruction of all morality, wholly incompatible with a functioning society. To which the Universalists responded, on the contrary, when you comprehend the magnitude of God's love for you, the response is such joy and such gratitude that the only rational response is to pay God back, to pay it forward. When you understand that love is the supreme force in the universe and the sole desire of creation, you lean into it. And for people who were used to grappling with the threats of hell, and this was a very real fear for people at that time and still is for some people today, receiving the Universalist message of no hell was like being released from spiritual prison. It was an unburdening of this heavy load of fear and anxiety that people carried. The spiritual burden of not enough, of being not enough. And when you are released from that burden of being not enough, when you understand that your true name is, always has been beloved, you love more, not less. Now, most Unitarian Universalists today probably cannot try on the worldview of this theology as a perfect fit, because most of us do not believe in a literal heaven or hell in the same way that our Universalist ancestors did. I'm speaking of most UUs, certainly not intending to speak for all. We're a theologically very diverse bunch. But whatever we think about or wonder about our death and what happens when we die, the salvation of our souls in that 19th century way is not an active concern for many of us. So there's not the same urgency behind these ideas. But Unitarian Universalists today do often use the language of love and the power of love. We say we have put our faith in love, or we trust in love, or we seek to transform the world with acts of love. And whatever our theological differences, whether we consider ourselves theists, atheists, polytheists, humanist, pagan, Christian, Buddhist, or just doing our own unnameable thing that we do, the most common intersection of all of our religious perspectives, the most common value we express, the object of the faith that we name, and the instrument by which we hope to change the world, the North Star by which we orient our lives as Unitarian Universalists, is love. We believe in the power of love. But how much do we believe in the power of love? A little? A lot? Does it feel sometimes like a wistful hope? Does it feel like a high-stakes gamble? Does it feel like a loving trust or an energizing confidence? How much? Because this is how much our Universalist forebears believed in the power of love. Totally. Completely. Because one way of translating the idea that everyone goes to heaven is to say that unbeknownst to us, while we were going about the business of our human striving and our human struggling and our human failing, love has already won. We don't need to win that battle for ourselves or for other people. It's over. Love has won. For our Universalist ancestors, the power of love is ultimately irresistible. We can resist it. We do resist it. We hurt ourselves and others sometimes in the process, but we do not need to fear the ultimate outcome because love has already won. Can you step inside that worldview? Imagine believing that the power of love is not just considerable or persuasive or worth believing in, but undefeatable, irresistible. It's a challenging idea for me to try on, I'll admit, in a world of falling bombs and active shooters and hungry children and crumbling ecosystem and organized and well-funding hate. I do believe in the power of love. Am I comforted by that belief? Am I unburdened by that belief? Is my belief in the power of love greater than my fear of not enough? The fear that I am not enough, or we collectively are not enough, or love is not enough. Well, how could one get there theologically? Perhaps we do believe in a God of love who has a plan. Perhaps we believe in a cosmic love to which we all ultimately return someday. Perhaps we believe in a spirit of love that acts in the world, or even many such spirits if we're polytheists. Perhaps we believe in love as a historical force, a logical principle, one that is ultimately stronger than hate. And perhaps we believe in love not as a fixed and static thing, but as a power that grows over time, something we tend and nurture, something we are creating together, dreaming into being as a vital force in our world and our lives. And perhaps we don't know exactly what we believe, but there is something in our hearts that tells us that love is worthy of our confidence, something that won't let us go, something that keeps pulling us back. For myself, this is not an intellectual exercise, but an imaginative one. Unitarian Universalism speaks to me as a religion of liberation, transformation, healing. It calls us to build a world where all people are free, all people are valued, all people are cared for, and where we live in harmony with the natural world. And this is the vision that I have set my heart on, and I believe you have too. And sometimes it feels like a distant vision, like a fragile or a tenuous thing, a delicate thing. Can I imagine there is a love so powerful that this dream is not tenuous at all, but mighty? Can I imagine a love irresistible? If we lived our lives as though love has already won, we would be strengthened to serve that vision of love with more confidence. With the fear of not enough removed from our hearts, we might be inspired to be more active, not less, take greater risks for love, not less. We could trust that we will play our role and God will play God's role, or Spirit will play Spirit's role, or the mysterious workings of love will play love's role, however we understand that. So the question I invite you into, what would a Unitarian Universalism be like if, regardless of our theological diversity, we shared our Universalist ancestors' confidence in the irresistible power of love? And the fruit of that conviction would not be creeds or orthodoxies. We need not think alike to love alike. It would be kindness. It would be compassion. It would be commitment and courage. And so on this Easter Sunday, let us celebrate with joy and gratitude our Universalist heritage and proclaim our trust that we are enough, that we have been named beloved, and that love will change the world. Let us dare, even if just for today, to live as though love has already won. Blessed be, and amen.